Hi there, my name is Ariel Forbes and I am with the Tennessee Gamma chapter from Tennessee Wesleyan University. Today I want to talk a little bit about working memory and its effect on learning. So are working memory and short-term memory the same? No, they are separate but highly related constructs. So short-term memory is the retention and repetition of information, and working memory is additional manipulation of that information. So what is working memory? Well, it's the system responsible for the temporary storage and concurrent processing of information. Basically the hub of cognition. So it plays an important role in comprehension, learning, reasoning, problem solving, and reading. And today I'm going to focus a little bit on Alan Baddeley's approach to working memory. There are other theorists, but I prefer Alan Baddeley because I think he shows a comprehensive approach. So in his approach, there are four basic structures to working memory. So there's the central executive, which is the control processes, the phonological loop, which is all of your speech-based processing, like language, the visuospatial sketchpad, which is all the information that's coded in a visuospatial format, so what you see, your spatial relations. And then there's the episodic buffer, which is your multimodal temporary store. So think of it as like a TV screen in your mind that puts all of these things together into an episode for you to remember and to process. So working memory and learning. The central executive is responsible for writing composition. It pulls in all of those different features from your phonological loop, from your visuospatial sketchpad. You remember how to write the letter A, you remember spelling, you remember maybe you are giving a speech and you can write that down as you're giving it, things like that. The phonological loop, like I said, is helpful with spelling and orthography, so remembering how to form words. There is also a linear relationship between working memory abilities and math achievement. So this basically means that the higher your working memory abilities, the higher math achievement test scores are looking. Conditions that overload the working memory capacity result in poor performances both in adults and children. So this is common sense. You're in an environment that's very noisy and that has lots of visual distractions as well. It's going to be hard for you to sit down and do that math problem or for you to sit down and write that paragraph. And concurrent tasks involving all three, so the central executive, the phonological loop, and the visuospatial sketchpad, have a deleterious effect on the execution of calculation processes. And this is why word problems are so difficult in math, because it's involving you having to hold all of those numbers in your brain, and sometimes you'll have to draw a picture and then at the same time they'll ask you to write and explain what you're doing. It's a lot at once, and it's a process that takes time to learn because working memory can be developed. So more about working memory and learning. There are relationships between working memory and auditory processing abilities. So it's back to that idea of mental math, being able to hold things in your brain that you hear and being able to manipulate them all in your mind. There is a cognitive cost of a working memory task. So all that means is that it's exhausting for your brain. The more that you do in a day, the more exhausting that it gets. It takes a toll on your brain. And so when we're in the classroom, we need to remember that. If we're doing a lot of word problems, maybe we need to be spacing them out and doing brain breaks. Being realistic about our expectations with them. We want high expectations, but we want them to be able to achieve those expectations. And there is a cognitive cost for every critical thinking problem that you try to address in the classroom. Stimulus similarity is something else that we want to be careful about. So when we're teaching a new subject, if you're teaching two new skills in math or in reading, maybe you're teaching new vowel teams, stimulus similarity is a problem that we forget all the time because it's easy to group things together that are similar, but it makes it more difficult for your brain to process that and to move it from working memory into long-term memory. So it might be good to space those out in a different way and teach, totally different vowel teams or, teach totally different math strategies, things like that. Spoken versus silent processing. So participants achieved higher scores when they read things silently. So it's easier for us to process things if we're not speaking them out loud. A lot of times when I'm having trouble focusing, and I know others are like this too, I'll read it out loud to myself and try to really zone in And they've proven that actually that's not helpful. There's more interference because not only are you trying to process it silently and mentally, you're also speaking it, so you're engaging your phonological loop, and you're putting more of a cognitive cost on your working memory. Working memory in the classroom. So how can we apply all of this theory and all of this research into the real world classroom, which we know is sometimes very different from research? What's important is that the basic modular structure of this model, the Allen-Baddeley model, is present from 6 years of age and possibly earlier. So all that means is that they're able to test and prove that at 6 years old, all of these things are happening in a child's brain. The central executive, the visuospatial sketch pad, the phonological loop, the episodic buffer, it's all there at 6 years old. Memory span also increases significantly from the age of 3 to 9. This is our prime early childhood years. We know that this is the time when kids are just little sponges. They're soaking up everything that we teach them. We need to encourage that memory development. And at age 7, there is a developmental period that marks the beginning of significant improvements in working memory function. So not only is their memory span increasing during this time, but at 7, there is a huge developmental boost in working memory functioning, and we can play off of that. And there's also, of course, cognitive maturation, and there are better strategies there for that and how we can improve on that. More about working memory in the classroom. So it is possible for an individual to score high on spatial working memory while scoring low on verbal working memory. So they busted the myth of the right brain versus the left brain person. You know, we have abilities in both sides of our brain. But something that's interesting is they are showing research that says that an individual can score high on math working memory abilities while scoring low on verbal working memory abilities. And so it's our job to learn how to test those things so that we can boost the side that might be low so that they have equal working memory ability. Because all of this plays a critical part in our ability to problem solve. So critical thinking skills, those things that we're constantly asking them to do, like writing, mental math, all of these new problem solving techniques that we're pushing in the classroom, working memory, can boost a lot of that. And then of course, back to listening comprehension in noisy places. Listening comprehension in noise places greater demands on children's working memory. This is common sense. It's like we talked about earlier. Not only is it the primary task of listening, so trying to listen to the teacher, but they're also trying to filter out all of the other noise. And this is an incredibly difficult skill for our early childhood, especially our pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. Their working memory abilities really are not developed enough to be able to do that. So when we are giving instructions or we are giving a lesson in any way, we don't really lecture to our little people. We need to be sure that that classroom is quiet. And I know that it sounds like common sense, but it's very difficult in reality. But this is important. A lot of those kids cannot focus when it's noisy. Not to say that we need a silent classroom, but when we're asking children to do these problem solving ability tasks, we need to work on a quiet, peaceful environment for them. So can we improve our working memory? I've touched on it a little bit, but now I really want to go into strategies and techniques. So one of the biggest strategies is massed versus spaced learning. So mass learning is basically, you're grouping it all together, like teaching all of the vowel teams at once. You teach it, in a 1 to 2 day period, and then, okay, they've got it. Everything's fine, let's move on. So mass learning, they've proven that there's more interference between successive items. So the more vowel teams you add on, or the more math strategies that you add on, the less they're going to remember those things and be able to apply them. So they recommend, of course, spaced learning. Now, in the classroom, this requires more time, which is something that we're always stressed about. But what's important is that we remember the most efficient use of that time. So those rest breaks, you don't just have to be sitting there or doing a go noodle or playing. You can do other things during those breaks. But what's important is to give your subjects some variety so that you're not doing it all together and hoping that they'll get something out of it. And then expanding retrieval practice. So this just means that each retrieval interval should be long enough to make retrieval as difficult as possible without actually rendering the item irretrievable. We do this all the time. Review, morning work, drill practice, it's all that same idea. And then, of course, strategies and techniques. Continued, meaningful processing. So connecting the information to real world stuff. We do this all the time and don't even realize it. But it's important to relate that things to other things in their memory, because the more connections that they have, the deeper that memory will last. So again, levels of processing theory is that same idea. The more deeply we process an item at the input stage, the better it will be remembered. And then elaborative rehearsal is just associative connections are created with other existing memories. And then maintenance rehearsal is important. It's that repetition to hold the trace temporarily so that we can then move it on to a deeper connection. More strategies and techniques. You can create potential retrieval cues in advance. You can also, the total time hypothesis says if you double the learning time, you double the amount of information stored. And then, of course, distribution of practice effect basically says be more efficient in cramming things in, especially before test time. But basically, improving working memory abilities in preschool children with normal abilities thus prevents difficulties in early academic achievement that may have otherwise occurred. Improving working memory in our children could boost their scores in all kinds of new ways. We just want to give these kids the best foundation that we absolutely can. And I think that working memory could be a new piece that we could work with them with. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.